Hey, good morning, everyone. Happy Friday morning to you. Welcome back to Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. In a moment, going to be getting into our video number 3 in our review and response to Mr. Paul Ellis's book, AD 70 and the End of the World. Couple of things before I get into that. Number one, next Monday is Labor Day, so I will not be with you on my morning musings. I hope you have a really safe weekend. I hope you enjoy Labor Day. And again, I hope that you are safe. Now, we have mailed out all of the back orders for the book, which on the special, the August special, which included Watching for the Parousia, where Jesus' apostles confused, and Paul and the Pharisees, or Paul on trial, Paul, the Pharisees, and the resurrection, which included Can God Tell Time or not and, but, or he came as a thief. I just want to let you know that, some of you have contacted me and said, hey, Don, where are my books? Well, I do apologize. I had a lot of books ordered. They did not ship them in a timely fashion, and then they shorted me on my books. But I did get some in. I believe that we filled all of those orders now. Pardon me. So you should be getting that, your order, very, very shortly. We certainly hope that the post office does not let us down. Okay. Seemed like I had something else. I've forgotten what it was. Okay. So we are continuing, as I stated, our review and response to Mr. Ellis's book, AD 70 and the End of the World. As I've stated to you, in many ways, Mr. Ellis is an enjoyable writer. His style is easy to read. However, theologically, I find his writings to be both confused and confusing. This is particularly true, and I say particularly true, although as I read further on, I find the same kind of issues. But on pages 69 and following, Mr. Ellis is guilty of confusion and anachronism and outright distortion of the text of the Bible. Here's what I mean by that. Jesus said in Matthew chapter 24, 30 and following, that immediately after the tribulation, verses 29 and following, immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, the moon will not give its light, the stars of heaven will not give their light, and the powers of the heaven will be shaken. Then will appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. Now, I shared with you in last week's video that Mr. Ellis takes that language of the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven as a reference to Daniel chapter 7, 13 and 14, which he believes was fulfilled at the ascension of Christ. That is a major anachronism. Notice once again, as I pointed out last week, Jesus said immediately after the tribulation of those days. Now, that means immediately after the tribulation, which Mr. Ellis posits at the time of the Jewish war. Not at Christ's ascension, not at the Transfiguration, not at Pentecost, but at the time immediately after the tribulation, then they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven. Now look what it does not say. It does not say immediately after the tribulation they will look back and see that the Lord had ascended. It's not what it says. Now, seeing the sign of the Son of Man in the heavens does tell us that the fall of Jerusalem, as Mr. Ellis sort of kind of hints at, that the fulfillment of Christ's prophecy would prove that he was enthroned. Okay, so far so good. But his enthronement is not his coming immediately after the tribulation. You see, he's guilty of anachronism. Then he jumps forward, or I should say jumps back, to Matthew 16, 27 and 28. Now, it's really fascinating to me that he focuses on Matthew 16, 28. And he says, here we begin to understand why Jesus told the apostles or disciples that some of them would not taste death until they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. Matthew 16, 28. He was saying, some of you, but not all of you, Judas, will see me raised in power and ascend to heaven in glory. And in Acts 2, some of them did. Incidentally, the "you will not taste death," unquote, promise is recorded in all three synoptic gospels, and in each case the promise precedes the transfiguration of Christ. The transfiguration and ascension of Christ are connected like a movie and a trailer. On the Mount of Transfiguration, the disciples got a glimpse of Christ's kingly identity. Up until then, the disciples may have wondered whether Jesus was the Messiah. Sure, he had healed the sick and raised a few dead people, but had the prophets done all that? Who was to say Jesus wasn't just another prophet? But Jesus said, you will see. And on the Mount of Transfiguration, they saw the glory cloud and Jesus shining brighter than the sun, and they heard the affirmation of God. They became, as Peter said, eyewitnesses of his majesty. So the Transfiguration was the trailer, the Ascension was the feature movie. The Transfiguration gave the disciples a glimpse of what was to come, but the Ascension left them gazing heavenward in slack-jawed awe. Now, I've got to tell you, there is a tremendous amount of anachronism going on here. There is a tremendous amount of eisegesis going on here. There is a tremendous amount of ignoring context going on here. Point number one, why does Mr. Ellis appeal only to Matthew 16:28 and apply it to, first of all, the Transfiguration, and secondly, the Ascension? Why does he do that? Well, because, you see, if he honored the context, he would know that Matthew 16:28 is joined grammatically to verse 27. What is verse 27? The Son of Man will come in the glory of the Father with his angels, and shall reward every man according as his works. And verily I say unto you, there are some standing here which shall not taste of death until they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. What's my point? The point of it is that the coming of the Son of Man in Matthew 16:28 is the same coming of the Son of Man of verse 27. But the coming of the Son of Man of verse 27 is the coming of the Son of Man in judgment of all men. It is not the Ascension. It is not, as Mr. Ellis wants us to believe, the Ascension and Pentecost. It is the judgment. Now again, the two verses are joined grammatically by the little term, verily I say unto you, in the Greek it is amen lego humin. It appears 95 times in the New Testament. And by the way, I document every word of this in my little book, Can You Believe Jesus Said This? Go to my website, donkpreston.com, BibleProphecy.com, and order the little book. Sorry, I can't pay shipping. Can't do that. But look, you will be absolutely amazed at the incredible evidence, the overwhelming evidence to prove you cannot divide verse 27 from verse 28. And you know what that means? Verse 27 is a time of judgment. which means that verse 28 is the time of judgment. Oh, and by the way, verse 27 and verse 28 is the time of Christ coming in judgment of those who were going to kill him and his apostles. Starting with verse 21 and following, Jesus is talking about the suffering of himself and his apostles. But verse 27 is his promise to come in vindication of his suffering, his death, and that of his apostles. Folks, that did not happen at the Transfiguration, although the Transfiguration was a vision of it, which raises another point. Mr. Ellis identifies the Transfiguration as the fulfillment of, there are some standing here which shall not taste of death until they see the Son of Man coming. Well, he says the Transfiguration was like a trailer of a movie. It's a forecast. It's a preview. Well, I agree that the Transfiguration is a preview of the fulfillment of verse 28. But you see, the preview, the Transfiguration, was not a vision of Christ's ascension in fulfillment of Daniel chapter 7. The Transfiguration, and it's interesting to me here how Mr. Ellis very casually just simply says that Peter refers to the Transfiguration, notice this, as a vision of the glory of Christ, which he posits as the Ascension. Sorry, that doesn't work. Peter said that the Transfiguration was a vision of the parousia of Christ, not the Ascension, but of the parousia. Peter was defending the doctrine of the coming of the Lord, because he says, we have not followed cunningly devised fables when we made known to you the power and the parousia of our Lord Jesus Christ, but we were eyewitnesses of his majesty. He was not saying, now look, we know that the doctrine of the parousia is true because we saw a vision of the Transfiguration, which has nothing to do with the parousia. No. He was saying, and by the way, interesting point, church history is virtually united. There's some dissenting voices here and there, but church history is virtually united on the fact that Peter was saying he saw a vision, he and the other apostles saw a vision of Christ's second coming. Not a vision of the Ascension, not a vision of Pentecost. Keep in mind, Matthew 16, 27 and 28 is the coming of the Son of Man in judgment. And Peter's allusion to it, Peter's citation of the Transfiguration as a vision of the parousia, proves that, because Peter was still looking for the fulfillment of the Transfiguration vision, i.e. the parousia. And there's something else here. When Mr. Ellis tries to say that the Transfiguration was a vision of the Ascension, a forecast of the Ascension and Pentecost, not only is he ignoring the judgment context of Matthew 16, 27 and 28, he is ignoring Jesus' very simple words. When he says, there are some standing here. Now wait a minute. Mr. Ellis says that refers to the Transfiguration. When was the Transfiguration? Approximately a week after Jesus stated, some standing here will not die until. Are we supposed to believe? Now, by the way, according to Mark chapter 8, there was a tremendous multitude present when Jesus uttered these words. So Jesus wasn't talking strictly about his 12 apostles, as Mr. Ellis wants us to believe when he says, some standing here, not you, Judas, but some standing here, i.e. the apostles. Oh, Peter, James, and John. We'll see this. No. Out of that large multitude, only some, not only some of the apostles, but only some of that large multitude would live to see the parousia. Are we supposed to believe that only a few, only some, a minor part of that large multitude live for another week? Same argument is true if we try to make it, as Mr. Ellis tries to jump from, first of all, the Ascension and then Pentecost. It was at the very most, about 4.5 months from Matthew 16, 27 and 28 until the day of Pentecost. Only some of that large multitude lived until the day of Pentecost. You know, in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, when Paul spoke about Christ and his ascension and who he was seen by, his resurrection, who he was seen by after he was resurrected, Paul makes a point of saying, now remember, he's writing 57, 58 AD, so he is writing about, from 33 to 57, 24, 25 years afterwards, and he said he was seen of over 500 brethren at one time, the majority of whom are still alive today. The majority are still alive today. And yet we're supposed to believe that although a great multitude was present, when Jesus said, only some, a few, will live to see me coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory, we're supposed to believe that only a handful, a small minority of that large multitude lived for another week or lived for another 4.5 months. And thus, what we see in Mr. Ellis's book, as I suggested, and he jumps back and forth in his anachronistic applications. He says that some of the apostles, he was telling his apostles, you will see, but they, the unbelievers, they will not. No, that's not what Jesus said. In Mark 8, Luke 21, which Mr. Ellis refers to, there are some standing here. That's part of the multitude. It's not just the apostles. Jesus was not saying, you, my apostles, are going to live to see me coming in glory and know that I came before the Ancient of Days in fulfillment of Daniel 7. No, it was that multitude. So his attempt to delineate and economize between the Jews and the apostles fails. And there's even more, in which he jumps here, he jumps there, he conflates them together, and he makes false distinctions, false delineations. He makes incredibly anachronistic applications. He ignores the context of Matthew 16, 27 and 28. He ignores the grammar of Matthew 16, 27 and 28. He ignores the fact that it's a judgment context, which is not the Transfiguration, which is not Pentecost. He ignores Peter's application of the Transfiguration to the second coming. He simply makes it a vision of Christ's glory, which he applies to the Transfiguration. Well, it certainly did apply to the Transfiguration, but Peter said the Transfiguration was a vision of the second coming, not the Ascension, not Pentecost. Everywhere we turn, in application or examination of Mr. Ellis's claims on page 69 through 72 and 73, we find these major discrepancies, major self-contradictions, major violations of chronology, major violations of context, and it just simply doesn't work. Again, let me encourage you to get my little book. Can you believe Jesus said this? You will see an in-depth grammatical, linguistic discussion of Jesus' words in Matthew 16, 27 and 28, and the claims such as Mr. Ellis that it referred to Pentecost or the Ascension. Get yourself a copy. Okay, don't forget, I'll not be with you on Monday. You have a fantastic weekend. Please be safe. I'll see you on Tuesday.